Moderator of Meet the Press, Kristen Welker, just sat down exclusively with French President Emmanuel Macron just moments ago following those lengthy peace talks at the White House today. She pressed him on that hot mic moment with President Trump that we saw earlier and whether a ceasefire needs to be reached to hold the trilateral meeting and the role French...
In the fog of war, words matter as much as weapons. Ukraine is asking for a ceasefire. Vladimir Putin and now Donald Trump are pushing for a peace deal. At first glance, the two might sound almost identical, but dig deeper and you'll see a world of difference. One is a pause in fighting, the other could reshape international law, redraw maps, and redefine the rules that have held global order together since the Second World War. So, why does this distinction matter so much? Let's break it down, carefully through history, law, and the very survival of nations, the competing visions for ending the war. When it comes to Ukraine's war with Russia, the language used to describe solutions carries enormous weight. President Volodymyr Zelensky has been consistent. His government wants a ceasefire, a temporary halt to fighting that could save lives and open the door for humanitarian relief. In contrast, Russian President Vladimir Putin is not satisfied with a short pause. He is demanding something much larger, a peace agreement that cements territorial changes Russia has pursued through force. And in a surprising turn, U.S. President Donald Trump has aligned more closely with Putin's vision than with Kiev's plea. European leaders, however, remain cautious. They argue that without a ceasefire, there can be no serious negotiations. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz put it bluntly during a recent summit in Washington. I can't imagine that the next meeting will take place without a ceasefire. The debate is not just about semantics. It is about the rules that govern the international system and the precedent that any agreement sets for the future. Whether the world allows aggression to be rewarded or insists on upholding the post-war order will determine not only Ukraine's survival, but also Europe's long-term security. This is why the gap between Kiev's plea and Moscow's demand is not just political maneuvering. It is a clash of two visions for global stability. What a ceasefire really means. To understand Ukraine's position, it helps to look at the mechanics of a ceasefire. In simple terms, a ceasefire is a mutual agreement to pause hostilities. Both sides retain the territory they currently control, but the guns fall silent. History is filled with ceasefires of varying lengths. The Christmas truce of 1914 on the Western Front lasted just a few days, while the ceasefire between Cyprus and Turkey has endured for decades without a permanent peace settlement. In Ukraine's case, the aim would be to stop the immediate bloodshed, allow aid to reach devastated areas, and create a space for diplomacy to work. Crucially, a ceasefire does not concede sovereignty. It does not redraw borders, it simply recognizes a military stalemate for the moment. For Kiev, this is not surrender, it is survival. Moreover, ceasefires often act as testing grounds. They reveal whether the parties involved are serious about peace or merely buying time to regroup. For Ukraine, a ceasefire could expose Russia's true intentions. If Moscow honors it, there might be room for further dialogue. If not, it confirms that Russia is uninterested in genuine peace. This pause is not the end of war, but it can be the beginning of accountability, allowing the international community to measure trust and prepare longer-term strategies. What a peace deal implies. Now contrast that with what Putin is seeking. A peace agreement in international law is not temporary. It is a binding treaty that dictates the future relationship between two countries. In this scenario, Ukraine would be asked to legally recognize Russia's control over areas seized by force, particularly in Donetsk and Luhansk, collectively known as the Donbass. International lawyers warn that such an arrangement would be fundamentally illegal. Jeremy Pizzi, a legal advisor with Global Rights Compliance, notes, "Any treaty that you procure by use of force is effectively illegal and inherently void." In other words, if Russia gains territory by military aggression and then formalizes it in a treaty, the deal itself cannot be recognized under the UN Charter. This is not just theory. After World War II, the international community agreed that conquest by force must never again be rewarded. Allowing Russia's demands would dismantle that principle and open the door for similar acts of aggression elsewhere. And the dangers don't stop there. If Ukraine were pressured into such a treaty, It would not only weaken its sovereignty, but also normalize the idea that might makes right. Other powers watching closely, from Asia to the Middle East, would take note. The very fabric of international diplomacy, built on law and consent, would unravel. This is why the distinction between ceasefire and peace deal isn't just legal. It is profoundly moral and global in its consequences, the stakes for Ukraine's constitution and people. Even if Zelensky wanted to sign such a deal, the Ukrainian constitution ties his hands. Any change to the country's borders must be approved by a national referendum. This safeguard exists precisely because of fears that Russia might try to manipulate leaders into ceding land. Public opinion makes the matter even clearer. A survey by the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology found that the vast majority of Ukrainians reject recognizing any of their territory as part of Russia. Even among those living far from the front lines, there is a strong consensus that Ukraine must remain whole. This means that any peace deal requiring territorial concessions would be not only illegal under international law, but also politically impossible within Ukraine itself. The Ukrainian people have already endured years of attacks, displacement, and destruction. To them, giving up territory would mean rewarding the very aggression that has caused so much suffering. Ukrainians also see their struggle as part of a larger identity, a defense of democracy, sovereignty, and independence. To concede land would not just be a loss of geography, but a loss of dignity. Their constitution reflects this collective will, ensuring that no leader, however pressured, can bargain away their homeland. Thus, Ukraine's resistance to a peace deal is not stubbornness. It is democracy itself speaking through law and people's voice. The military and strategic dimension. Beyond the legal and constitutional barriers, there are practical reasons Kyiv cannot accept Moscow's demands. Russia already controls nearly all of Luhansk and more than 70% of Donetsk. Yet Putin is asking for even more, including strategic cities that form the backbone of Ukraine's defenses. Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, and Kostiantynivka are not just names on a map. These industrial hubs are connected by key roads and railways that allow Ukraine to move troops and supplies. If these were handed over, the road to central and western Ukraine would be wide open. Surrendering these cities under a so-called peace agreement would weaken Ukraine militarily and potentially leave it defenseless against future offensives. As analysts at the Eurasia Group wrote, neither Ukraine nor the Europeans will accept that Russia should be given more land than it has captured. Consider also the psychological dimension. Losing these cities would signal to both soldiers and civilians that years of sacrifice had been in vain. Military morale, already tested, could collapse. Strategically, then, a peace deal could do what bombs and bullets fail to achieve: break Ukraine's will from within. For Kyiv, the choice is stark: preserve defense lines now or risk losing the entire country later. The trust deficit with Moscow. For many Ukrainians, the biggest obstacle to a peace agreement is trust, or rather the lack of it. Russia has been involved in military aggression against Ukraine for more than a decade. From the annexation of Crimea in 2014 to the ongoing battles in Donbass, Moscow has consistently violated agreements while pursuing its goals through force. Jeremy Pizzi summed up the skepticism. Russia has feigned negotiations, feigned good faith, while continuing to use violence. There is no logical, sensible reason to trust Russia in the absence of a precursor, a genuine commitment to stop killing Ukrainians. This distrust is not paranoia. Past ceasefires have been broken almost immediately. Moscow has used pauses in fighting to regroup, rearm, and launch fresh attacks. For Ukraine, agreeing to a permanent peace deal under current conditions would be like signing a contract with no enforcement and no accountability. Trust, once lost, is hard to rebuild. Russia's repeated breaches, from Minsk agreements to local truces, have left deep scars in Ukrainian diplomacy. For Kyiv, the lesson is bitter but clear. Paper promises mean little if the partner across the table is determined to use war as a negotiating tool. Until Moscow demonstrates restraint without coercion, no treaty can ever be worth the ink. Europe's calculated position. European leaders, caught between U.S. policy shifts and Ukrainian survival, are treading carefully. They support a ceasefire as the most realistic first step. For them, the priority is stopping the violence without legitimizing territorial conquest. Their approach reflects both moral and strategic concerns. Morally, Europe cannot endorse an agreement that rewards aggression. Strategically, they know that if Russia is allowed to annex Ukrainian land through force, other countries in Europe could be next. The principle of territorial integrity is not just about Ukraine, it is about the security of the continent. European officials have reportedly made it clear to Trump that while they are willing to acknowledge the current military reality on the ground, they will not accept the permanent annexation of Ukrainian territory. The difference may seem small, but in diplomatic terms, it is enormous. Europe's caution also reflects its collective memory. From World War II to the Balkan conflicts of the 1990s, Europeans have learned that appeasement carries a heavy cost. A ceasefire, even if imperfect, buys time for diplomacy. A forced peace deal risks planting the seeds of a larger war. For Europe, Ukraine is not just a neighbor in crisis, it is the front line of their own defense. Trump's alignment with Putin. Perhaps the most striking development is President Trump's recent position shift. While initially calling for a ceasefire, Trump has since echoed elements of Moscow's language, questioning whether a temporary truce is necessary at all if a broader peace deal can be achieved. At a meeting in the White House on August 18th, attended by Zelensky and European leaders, Trump reportedly pressed the idea of moving directly toward a peace treaty. Observers noted how closely his arguments mirrored Putin's long-standing demands, including NATO restrictions on Ukraine. For analysts, this raises an important question. Does Trump fully grasp the distinction between a ceasefire and a peace deal, or is he willing to blur that line for the sake of a quick resolution? The answer could shape not just Ukraine's future, but also America's role as a defender of international law. What Trump appears to value is speed, the chance to claim a breakthrough where others have failed. But speed is rarely the ally of justice. By skipping the step of a ceasefire, Washington risks endorsing a settlement built on coercion rather than consent. For America, the decision is more than tactical. It is about whether U.S. leadership will reinforce the global rules it helped create or abandon them under pressure for short-term headlines. Why this distinction matters for the world. At its heart, the debate is about more than Ukraine. If a country can take land by force and then keep it through a treaty, the global order established after World War II weakens. A ceasefire preserves options for diplomacy without legitimizing aggression. A forced peace deal, on the other hand, risks normalizing injustice and encouraging future conflicts. As one legal expert put it, that's the point of international law, not to reward the side using force. Ukraine's stance is therefore not just about defending its borders, but about protecting the principle that strength alone cannot rewrite the map. So, when you hear leaders debate ceasefire versus peace deal, remember, the words are not interchangeable. For Ukraine, for Europe, and for the world, they represent two very different futures. One offers breathing room for diplomacy and survival. The other could undermine the foundation of international law. What do you think? Should Ukraine focus on securing a ceasefire first, or is there any logic in Trump's push for a broader deal? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown valuable, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss more in-depth analyses of the issues shaping our world.